Good Morning America, Chapter 1. It was back again last night. It was almost comforting to be greeted by its presence, as I had been anticipating, longing, and waiting. I used to wonder why it only made its appearance in the night, but in these long hours of being trapped in my own serenity, before the hindrance of dawn upon me, I have stumbled across the answer. It feeds from the dark, the deprived soul. To the weak of mind but strong of heart, to the sick, it flocks to the deranged and the depraved. Is that why it flocks to me? My thoughts and patience console me, until suddenly my eyes are wide and gleaming in the night, my mouth spread in the mischievous grin of that of a child, as the voice of reason rings through my mind. No one else can hear reason, perhaps because no one wants to. You cannot see, smell, touch or hear reason. You cannot hear as I hear, and for that do I pity you, or envy you, even hate you? I cannot derive one emotion from the other as the source of my contempt. I do not know what I feel any more, or even if I feel anything at all. If I ever have, and if I ever will, remain a mystery to me. I listen to reason. Hello, Ben. The words echo through my head. Hello, reason, I replied. It's almost time now. You know that, don't you, Ben? Smiling now. Yes, I know reason, replied to the voice that in some small way reminded me of my father's. I dismissed the thought as soon as it had surfaced. You know what you have to do, don't you, Ben? I know reason. Now giddy, on the point of laughter. Kill them, reason. Kill them all. As reason spoke the words to Ben, and Ben to the dark, he recited his fateful vow to the night. Chapter 2. Insomniac's Embrace. Somewhere in New York City, 3:30 a.m. Detective Inspector Helm awoke in a sweat. Every damn night, he muttered under his breath, as he instinctively reached for his flask on the bedside table. He squints his eyes shut as he takes a swig of the fiery liquid within. Pulling his dead-weighted legs out over the edge of the bed and lumbering over to the window, Detective Inspector Helm stares down to the streets of his city below. The city that never sleeps, and neither do I. Aren't we a pair? He almost smiled at the thought. His love-hate relationship with that city stretched out for longer than he cared to recall, but the sleepless nights that haunt his mind and drain his face of colour are seemingly simple to pinpoint. To the day, in fact. It wasn't the divorce or the stress of the job that robbed his body of energy and replaced his blood with alcohol. Not even the whispers at the station of an early forced retirement. It wasn't even the diagnosis. At least 7 months. Biggest tumour I've seen on someone your age. Inoperable. He shudders. It was one night, one job, one bullet. And every night when Detective Inspector Helm puts his head to the pillow of his run-down apartment, he is thrown back into that night 6 months ago and is caged in its vice-like accurate recreation. He's running. The rain is beating down like a drum. He hears the rain, his heart, his hurried footfalls, all in his ears, like some synchronized ominous beating of a rapidly approaching drum. He's approaching what he's chasing, and the familiar adrenaline rush of the capture is within grasp. He's fast, but you're not old. You're experienced, a veteran. He's a kid, at the oldest. Just a kid. Round corners they fly, until alleyway, brick wall, dead end. The hooded figure he pursues halts and slowly spins to face his pursuer. They stare, motionless, up at each other. Detective Inspector Helm holds the gun up to his prey. Come quietly now, kid. Don't make this a bigger mistake than it needs to be. He pauses and laughs wildly, and pulls out his own weapon, with no trace of fear in his eyes. Both figures stand stalemate, wondering who will break first, with nothing to lose, but yet everything at once, and as the assailant's hand flinches, the inspector instinctively pulls the trigger. He aims for the shoulder, but the bullet does not land here. Instead, it pierces him in the throat, and punches a hole where a windpipe used to be. Death is instant. The inspector lowers his gun, trembling, eyes wide, in the aftermath of his affliction. He falls, just 16 years old. And so, insomnia grips his mind every night, and as Detective Inspector Helm stares out at the city below, he wonders who else is awake and being tortured by their own minds, like him, on this godforsaken night. Chapter 3. Sanity, the Myth. As both Ben and D.I. Helm wrestle with the chokeholds of night, another man is caught under its grip. this night that marks the eve of our triple entente entwining, and the minds of free men brought together under debilitating circumstances. Dr. Philip Young awoke with a start. He lifted his head slowly from the desk and case studies had been rested on since roughly 12 a.m. when he had nodded off. Glancing up at his desk clock, he murmurs, "Jesus Christ, is that the time?" He rubs his eyes and stares at the red blinking digits of 3:30 a.m. on its display. Need to stop pulling these all-nighters. He stretched and stared at the empty coffee-stained mugs that had collected on his workspace. Fat lot of good that did, Phil. Caffeine doesn't even scratch the surface these days. Dr. Philip Young stared down at the open file on his desk as his eyes adjusted to the print on the pages. Name, Benjamin Frost. Age, 26. Diagnosis, episodes of psychosis and systematic high-functioning sociopathic behaviours. Ah, yes. How could one not remember him? That young man with eyes so very old, yet screaming, like his mind was trying to battle its way through those black pits of sinister enchantment. 30 years as a psychiatrist, and I was still stunned by how deeply manic yet calm those eyes were. Like he had long ago come to accept the insanity encased behind them, in fact had come to enjoy its company. It was with this thought that Dr. Young suddenly felt compelled towards something he had suppressed long ago, a fleeting memory in his conscience that had returned the appearance of a file. He stood up and clambered across the study to the filing cabinet. On the other side, he opened the drawer and began frantically searching through the various tapes, hundreds of recordings of his patients, reels of people's inner thoughts and demons, until he came across one further towards the back of the multitudes of tapes, with black printed labelling across them. This one in particular addressed to a certain Benjamin Frost, tape 1. Dr. Philip Young stood and stared at the tape in his hands, as his heartbeat throbbed heavily in his head. "It's not as bad as you remember. Just put it back in the drawer and forget about it." He grabs the tape recorder from the top of the cabinet and slots the tape inside. A younger, more enthusiastic version of himself speaks back at him. What Dr. Philip Young heard is as follows. Session 1. Dr. Philip Young with Benjamin Frost, 2nd of January 1998. Hello, Ben. Hello, Doctor. Do you understand why you're here, Ben? Can you tell me why you think you've been admitted to this institute? Because what's in my head? It scares you. But why would it scare us? We're, after all, only here to help you. No, you don't. You help me in some desperate attempt to understand what scares you about the dark. You help me to help yourselves. Well, why don't you tell me about what scares us? Does anything scare you, Ben? You want to know? I can tell you. You're all scared of one another, because you know about the dark of your own minds, and are frightened about what others would and have done with it. You're scared of insanity, when in reality the idea itself is a farce, a joke. One human being being more sane than the other? Please. We all have the premise inside us to be a monster, to become an animal. Because at the end of the day, that's all we really are, and never will be, animals. Screaming like savage beasts at the air that traps us all in our own versions of personal hell. So you believe we are all monsters? You? Even me? Oh, I believe especially you, Dr. Young. After all, would any truly sane man want to dive into the minds and thoughts that most normal people would run from? No, I believe you have spent so long looking at monsters, prodding at them and indulging their musings with your feeble diagnosis, that it is unquestionable now that this is exactly what you've become. Does that scare you, Dr. Young? Dr. Philip Young paused the recording and threw the recorder across the floor of his study, recoiled in a hyperventilating state against the far wall of his office. Dr. Young shrank down to the floor, cupping his face in his hands and sobbing as the devilish cackling of Benjamin Frost ricocheted through his mind. As Dr. Young came to the realization that froze him to the core, and clenched his heart with anguish, that in fact that did scare him. That scared him like nothing else before.